All right, so we're inside our JPanel. And just as a quick review, let's before we get started adding our mouse listener, let's take a look at what we've got here. Okay, so in our GUI panel, we have what we've been using already. We've got our standard test package, controller package. And I have my GUI panel. And I'm going to maximize this up here a bit. And so inside my GUI panel, we have some data members. We have our button and our text field and our spring layout. We've already had that ready. All that our button does right now is just click the button. It was amazingly boring. So what we need to do, though, is we're going to add a listener for this. And as we saw last time in class, and I've been working on the idea of a listener is simply an interface, which means all it means is that we are making some information for it, and we're going to have methods that we must implement. So to do that, we're going to go into our standard helper method of setup listeners, and we're going to add the listener for our mouse listener in there as well. So let's go down to our helper method for our setup listeners. And as you can see, we had our first listener, which is our action listener for our button. And in our button listener, we just made it so it had the method action performed. So action performed is the method required for the action listener interface. We're going to make a mouse listener interface instance. And to do that, it's a little bit different. We don't need to we're not referring to our button for a mouse listener. Our mouse listener is going to attach itself to the panel. So we're going to do this dot. We're going to add a mouse listener. So I have this dot add mouse listener, and I've done my squiggles for it. Now I've got error messages because I haven't done my imports, part A, and part B, I have not done my required methods. So the first thing we want to do is we're going to go up and do our imports. So we'll scroll up to our import section. And in our import section, I'm going to go to import java.awt.event.mouseListener. So it's in the same category of stuff as the action listener and action event. And we learned a shorthand way last week that we can not have to type all those in. So this line right here on line 13 covers everything from 10 through 12. So I have those three lines right there can be replaced simply by line 13, import java.awt.event.asterisk. So you can do either one of those two options. They're both valid and acceptable methods of doing this. If you're going to be doing multiple things within a library, like we have up here with swing.jpanel, .jbutton, .jtextfield, .springlayout, we could also replace that with javax.swing.asterisk. And so we can go ahead and we can collapse that down and have a little bit less code in there. Not really anything that saves us time or energy other than what we have to type when we actually set up our project. So we'll go ahead and we'll replace these three listeners, action listener, action event, and mouse listener, and we'll replace that with simply java.awt.event. And we will also replace our javax.swing.springlayout, .jtextfield, .jpanel, .jbutton. And we'll replace all of that with the same process of .asterisk. So we've saved a little bit of space up here in our import section. It doesn't hurt our code at all. It doesn't make an impact for us, but it does make it that we have a little bit less we have to remember to type in there. So imports, it's great to know that what we actually have to import, but the shortcut way of simply doing .asterisk will save us some time as we write our code. We say the name of the package that we want to import from, and then .asterisk for everything that's inside that segment. So I'm importing everything from the Swing library, and I'm importing everything from the java.awt.event library. So if there's a sub-library in there, it doesn't go deeper in because we have java.awt.color is a separate library. So I'm importing just java.awt.color right here. In this one, I'm importing everything that's in the event library, that sub-library right there. So it's just going to that one level. If it's deeper in or at a higher level, it's not imported. I have to do my import specifically for what I'm dealing with. And then I have my import for my controller because we have that model view controller structure within our application. So let's go back down to our setup listeners. And again, we call setup listeners inside our constructor. So we have this add mouse listener. So our add mouse listener method is no longer giving us an error, but mouse listener is still giving us an error. because we have not implemented the required methods for that interface. So if I use my cursor and I hover over that, we have the explanation of our error. This is always a good process to do. Always look to see what Java says your error is. And so as you can see right here, it says the type new mouseListener must implement the inherited abstract method mouseListener.mouseClicked mouseEvent. So this one right here will tell us that we have the idea that we need to have a mouseClicked method. So to do that, I'm going to go ahead and go right here. And it's going to be a public, and it's a void method, and mouseClicked. And I hover over on that, and it requires as a parameter a mouseEvent. So inside there, I need to put a parameter, mouseEvent, click. And it says, I must have an abstract method, mouseEntered mouseEvent. Oh, so I have to have a mouseEntered method. Okay, I added that one. Oh, I still have errors. That means there's lots of methods that this interface requires. So I hover over it again. And I need a mouseExited method. Okay, I'll add a mouseExited method. Public, void, mouseExited. And again, that takes a mouseEvent. And mouseReleased, because the opposite of clicked. So I enter and I exit, I click and I release. And I'll put them together. Public void, mouseReleased. Helps if I type. And it also takes, of course, a mouseEvent. How many more methods must I write? MousePressed. And so a MouseListener requires then these 5 methods. So if I want to have a MouseListener, so I want to listen for a mouse action. We have mouse events, in other words. We have 5 methods we must implement. MouseClicked, mouseReleased, MousePressed, mouseEntered, mouseExited. So those are the 5 methods we must implement as part of this interface. Now right here, we have implemented all 5 methods. We wrote them all. They don't do anything at all, but we've implemented them because the only requirement for the interface is did we actually put the code to them. Yeah, that is a fantastic idea. This is a great spot for a screenshot. Remember, again, one of the recommendations for doing screenshots, take a little note on this, saying these are the methods you must have when you're using a MouseListener. And even though they have nothing inside them, simply a blank line, it's still implemented. Yes?
Do you have to fill all of them with code?
Nope. All you have to do is literally just present the open and close squiggles on a void method. If it is a return type method, you simply have to return a valid value. It doesn't have to do anything. It can be completely stupid, like return null. If it's an array list method, or if it's a car method, or if it's an array method, it just returns null. If it's a Boolean method, just return false automatically. So these ones right now, the implementation of these is it does nothing. So when I enter the panel, what will it do? Nothing. When I exit the panel, what will it do? Nothing. Okay? So what we have right now, inside our app, we already have the idea of color. So I'm going to hit save right here. Now that I've hit save, what's a great thing to do? To my branch. So I go to my GitHub. I make sure I'm in my branch. I'm in my add mouse listener. And I'm going to put my little note right here saying added base implementation of the mouse listener. Hi there, sir. How are we doing today?
All right.
Fantastic. Go ahead and get logged on. We'll get you added to the screen for this. We're working on adding a mouse listener to our app. And so I make sure I'm committing not to master, but committing to add mouse listener. So check to make sure on your commit that you're committing to the branch. I'm going to go back to my code. So right now, just to show what's happening, we have up here, and we have our setup listeners method where we have the most amazing click event ever. Wow. We've done a method for changing color randomly a couple of times. We're going to put that together again right here, just because it's easy. So it's a private method because no one else needs to see it. It's a void method because it doesn't do anything. It doesn't impact other things. It just is an action set. And change random color. And why are we using change random color as a name? It explains what it does. So again, we make a method that has an explanation of what it does. We need to make 3 variables really fast. Int red, comma green, comma blue. Remember we introduced that last week where we can do multiple declarations on one line. It works the same way. We were simply just giving a reference, declaring those types. And we'll set red equals. We have to cast as an int because otherwise math.random gives us a double. And then we use parens just like we do in regular math to indicate do this first. We call the math.random method, which gives us a number between 0 inclusive, 1 exclusive. So it means it won't ever give us the full value we multiply the scale by, but it can give us 0. We multiply that by 256, the number of colors that we represent with RGB value. Because that gives us between 0 and 255, 256 discrete values. We'll do that same process for green. And we repeat that again finally with blue. Okay, so now we've got our random colors, random red, green, and blue values. And so we'll say this dot set background. And it's going to be a new color, parens, red, comma, green, comma, blue. So we have the idea that the change random color will change the color of my panel to a new background. And I'm using the this reference because I'm talking about changing the color of my screen. That's what I'm referring to. So I'm going to change the color of my screen when I call this method. So I declared 3 variables of type int. I assigned those 3 variables each a random number upon execution. And then I call set background at that point. So we have a method that we can change random color. The reason we're doing this is because we can actually see that color happen immediately. So we're going to go down here. We hit save. Great time to commit. We added a method. So in my commit sequence, I'm going to add added change random color. And commit it again. Always great to make multiple commits. The more commits is fine. And then inside my mouseEntered, I'm going to put a call to change random color. And I will then put the same call inside my mouseExit. So inside my MouseListener, I have 2 calls in their method, one for mouseEntered and one for mouseExited. So when I enter the panel, I'll change the color. When I exit the panel, I will change color. So let's go ahead and hit save, and we will play this to give it a try. We're going to load our app up here. And so I have my app. Now notice that right here, this is not part of my panel. This is part of the frame. So when I go from here into the panel, my color changes. It'll also change if I go off the panel and onto the text field, because the panel itself is separate from the pieces in it. So as I move back into the panel, I've changed my color. I move off to the other screen, changes color. And so I now have the most amazing app ever. So let's look at the difference between mouse clicked and mouse pressed. We call our method inside mouse clicked, and we're going to hit play again. So now when I move over, I'm no longer changing color randomly. So I'm using a right click right now, left click. There is no differentiation between right or left click on this. If I click the button, there is no impact because the panel itself is what's listening for the action, not the button. The button does not change color. The button just says don't click the button. Okay, so let's hover over right here on mouse clicked. So the mouse clicked option, if we notice right here, if we hover over, this will tell us the difference. So the mouse clicked is invoked when the mouse button has been both clicked, which means it's been both pressed and released on a component. So the mouse clicked is you clicked it and you released it, versus the mouse pressed is you are pressing down and you've not yet released. So if I change this right here from change random color, if I control that right here and I put it on mouse released, I click, nothing happens. I'm holding my mouse button down. I release it and it then changes color. Now we go in here if, and then swing utilities. Dot is left mouse button. And the event I would do is pass it clicked. So on that case, I'd use the mouse clicked event, because that's the event when I'm checking a click. And on that one, I would check for, I'm using the left click if it's on that point, or if I'm using the right click on that. Again, scrolling my cursor over here so we can see it. So if I right click, I right clicked. I'm using my left click with the left click. So the mouse click is a combination of both press and release. Now we have it right now that we've got the mouse action listener basically, where when the mouse leaves and exits or leaves and enters, and when we click and release. But we also can have it so when we detect motion of our mouse. So we've added our mouse listener. The mouse listener is the one that will give us the exit, entrance, our click and release. That's our first of our mouse listeners. The other listener we're going to look at, we're going to collapse this down. And inside our listener, we're going to go right here, make a new line after our add mouse listener. This add mouse motion listener. And we have a new mouse motion listener as what we're creating for it. And if we hover over it, it says we have some methods we have to add. The first method it says we need to add is the mouse moved method, which has also a mouse event as a parameter. So mouse moved. So it's a public method. It is a void type. It's called mouse moved. Then takes a mouse event. Moved. We also have a public void method. If we hover over here, where we have to have a method called mouseDragged. MouseDragged means holding a button, and mouse moved is just moving it. So let's take a look at that. So mouseDragged, and it also has a mouse event. And so our mouse motion listener has two methods we must implement as part of the interface. So our mouse listener has 5 methods that had to be implemented. Our mouse moved method, our mouse motion listener has 2 methods we must implement. So right now we've implemented them. They do nothing. The 2 methods we have to have for mouse motion listener, that interface requires 2 methods, mouse moved and mouse dragged. So let's try the change random color in the dragged first. So right now moving my mouse does nothing. I'm simply moving it. But if I drag, I have the most amazing app ever. Simply moving, no big deal. Dragging, amazingness. We've now added a couple components to this. We've added our mouse listener. The mouse listener is the action part. If I click and release or press my mouse, if my mouse enters or exits the panel. So those are the first ones that we worked with, and that's if the mouse is doing the actions of going into or out of the screen or being clicked. So the actiony parts. The mouse motion listener has if I'm dragging or if I'm moving. So we have 7 different possible actions we can do with a mouse. And every one of those actions can have a listener, or not a listener, excuse me, can have action happen because of it. Now, right now, with our mouse moved, it gets a little bit crazy with the amount of color change.
No, it's fine.
Now, maybe we want to have that mouse, that movement happen only if we move a bigger distance. So if I click right over here on my mouse moved, we have that lovely parameter mouse event moved. Now, let's take a look at our mouse event. Our mouse event has data in it. So inside our mouse event right here, moved, and I click on the dot, I can now get information about my mouse event movement. I can find out what my X is or my Y is on my screen. What I did is I typed in the name of my parameter, moved, which is my mouse event. I type in my dot, and it brings me the drop down of all the methods that are available or actions that are available to my mouse event that is my parameter for my project. So I can look through all of these, and this is like reading the API again that I've had you read before. So I can check to see if I'm pressing control down. But the main thing we'd be using is the idea of methods. And so I can do right here is the meta down, is the shift key down, is the alt down. So if I'm dragging my alt key as I click on this, I can make something happen. So I can have another event happen. So let's do that. Let's try this with this. Let's make an if test. If parens, and then moved dot is alt down. So we're adding a test on that. We don't need to say is alt down equals true, because it returns either true or false. And so my mouse moved. If my alt is down, I'm going to put my change random color inside that. Only if I'm holding my alt key down as I move it will it change color. I move my cursor, nothing happens. I hold my alt key down, and my color changes. So our mouse listener has methods right here that we can choose things to happen with it. If I have my is alt down, we talked about how we can have sequences with that, because alt is a special sequence, and that's why we can just not have to worry about extra things for that one. But alt and control are special ones we can do for that. We had sort of change random color. The drag is when it has the click down. We're actually clicking as we do something. Our mouse, and that's for the mouse motion listener. Our regular mouse listener deals with click, release, pressed, entered, and exited. Enter and exit are, do I go into and out of the panel? The press, did I just press down, not release? The release is exactly that. Am I releasing the button? And the clicked is, did I do the sequence of pressing and releasing? So we have those. Those are the methods we have to have because we're using a listener interface. These are the methods we have to have for using the motion listener interface. So we have that right there. So we're going to merge our project back in, again, talking the idea that we are putting our full project together. So we save. Always good to save again. We're going to go back and do our final commit. So finished implementing all methods. Actually, I'm going to do a quick summary like implemented methods. Motion listener. And so I had a quick little message for this saying that I'm doing the all methods required for the mouse motion listener interface. For a more detailed message, again, I hit commit to add mouse listener. So I've got my commits now done into my mouse listener right here. So I'm on that branch. I now need to go and merge the branches. So to merge the branches, I go up to my branch selector. I choose my master branch, which is the big trunk of my code, where all my code is stored. So I choose master. which brings me back right here. I move up to my branch dropdown. In my branch dropdown, I choose merge into, and I select master because I'm merging from the branch into my master code. And I choose from, and I choose my add mouse listener. So my master one is what I'm merging into. I'm merging from the mouse listener into my master branch. So I'm taking 3 commits, we merge into head. And I say merge. My project is now merged. We have this lovely symbol right here. It looks like a sideways 7. Pretty fantastic. And if I look over my history, I'm in my master. I now have in my master, I have my merge add branch. So that one is now incorporated into that. So I added a listener and I merged it in there.